Okay, so here we are, episode three. Um, and where we left off last was right after you got back from the war. You're 23,
22.
22, married, no kids.
Correct.
You moved back, if I recall, you moved back to California.
We left Oklahoma in January of 71, moved back to Southern California.
Barbara's pregnant because Matt's born in March of
Right.
71.
That's correct.
So she became pregnant pretty quickly when you got back. Must have.
No, not really. I got back in September of 69.
Oh, okay. So it was a couple of
So
years.
I spent another year in Oklahoma. And she had a
That's
baby in
right.
a couple, 3 months before we separated from the Army.
And then you finally moved to California in January of 1971
One.
and started working or started going to school. That's why you separated early, right?
Where I started going to East LA Community College,
With the intent to what? Just go to school and
just go
get
to
things figured
school. I
out.
got early out of the Army to go to school, so I needed to do that. In the meantime, I looked for a job, uh, looking for part-time work. Barbara's father, my father-in-law, Barbara's stepdad, was the manager of a Bank of America in East LA. He told me to go to another branch of the bank in East LA and talk to somebody, and I did, and they gave me a job. The job was as a part-time teller.
Just an entry level bank job
Yeah,
type deal. Yeah.
entry level, and there were a bunch of other part-time tellers working that were going to school in the same situation I was in. And it worked out pretty good. I worked there for a couple of years.
While you went to school,
Well, I only went to school for another 2 semesters, I believe.
did you have the intent to go to school for any longer than that, or was school not just?
Well, I was more than toying with, but not totally committed to graduating. But I was just going to school because that's what you did then.
So what were you going to school with a certain subject or major in mind?
I was doing psychology at the time.
Because you liked it, you enjoyed
It
it, you were
was
good at it.
it was fairly easy. It didn't commit me any direction particularly.
Did you have a job you were gonna? Did you have a career ambition at this point?
No, not at all. No, I was interested in becoming a police officer.
Why
Uh,
were you interested in becoming a police officer?
it sounded fun and a career move. It paid good money. It was with LAPD. So at some point in time, in probably 72, I went and took the LAPD test and didn't pass the interview. They asked me one of those questions uh, that are kind of trick questions. They
Yeah.
asked me if my partner was taking batteries out of a drugstore at night, what would I do? I didn't answer it correctly, so they just washed me out right there.
What was the right answer?
Turn him in.
You said, "Where can I get on that sweet action?"
So I said, I'll talk to him. I was going to talk to him and see what he would say.
Well, okay, so you at a certain point had aspired to be a police officer, which ultimately worked out for you of a
Right.
sort later on in life. But at this point, you're going to school and working in a bank.
Yes.
And you're going to school and you went to school. How many years of college did you actually get underneath your belt?
3.
Three? Oh, so you're actually fairly close to graduating
Yeah.
from. And were you a decent student?
Yes.
You were okay.
Yeah.
And have you appreciated that? I mean, would you go back and do the same thing again? Has that been helpful in any way? Your college experience?
The college experience itself, I learned a fair amount of just data, facts and figures and stuff. Graduating would have been a real helpful boost in a lot of areas.
So why did you not continue?
I My mom and dad had bought a house in Morgan, the house that they used to live in
Yep.
when you were young. And they rented the house to somebody. It was already occupied as a rental. They bought it. Then within a few months, it was probably early part of 74, late part of 73, very part of 74. The tenant moved out and left. My dad approached me and said, "Do you want to move to Morgan and live in the house for a reduced rate? Real cheap, really reduced rate." I said, "Well, I'll have to see if I can get a job." I went to Utah, got an interview with Walker Bank. They hired me and moved to Utah with the family, which consisted of me and Barbara and Matt.
Matt, who was almost 3 years old at that point.
Yeah, 2 or 3. He was young.
Well, I was born in 74. He was 3 years older than me.
Right.
So
She was pregnant with you when we moved.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
Quite pregnant, I would say. Coming into the third trimester.
right.
I had no idea that you lived in the house. How long did you live there?
A year, maybe a year, a few months.
And then what? Where did you go from there? And why did you not stay there longer?
I we bought a house on Darling Street. I don't remember that house.
Yep.
So
This is an Ogden.
yeah, so we moved there. In the meantime, I got a job at the fire department in Ogden. I went to work there for the fire department.
Wait, so at what point did you decide I'm done with the banking world and I want to be a firefighter?
I didn't like banking.
Just wasn't your jam.
No, I just was looking for other jobs. Just happened to be down at City Hall. There's a bulletin on the
In Ogden?
in Ogden, yeah, Ogden City Hall. The bulletin advertising the fire department test on a particular day, so I signed up for it and took the test.
This is in 1974 still? 75? 70.
75.
Okay.
In 1975, because I joined the fire department in March of 76. So anyway, that came about. I went to work for the fire department there.
Which ended up being essentially your career.
Yes,
For the most part.
right.
And so how long? So you move out of the house in Morgan. How long did you live there? For about a year, you say?
Yes, about a year.
And then you moved to Ogden. And at this point, it was probably right around this time, not long after, is my guess, that you separated from Barbara. Is that correct?
Right. It was during the early part of sometime in 75, I left. We separated, split up.
And you just went somewhere else in Ogden?
No, Barbara moved to California.
So you still had the house on Darling Street.
Yes.
And you stayed there, and she moved to California in with her sister, I presume, or
It
something
was
like
a
that?
friend of her sister's.
Okay.
I think her name was Charlene, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay. And then, but you stayed there in the house, and so you were,
Right.
and then,
It was a duplex, well, up top and a bottom apartment. So I lived in the bottom and rented out the top.
and you were working as a firefighter. Oh, close to it.
Yeah, I was very close to it. I built houses for a while. Built frame
Fill in the gap.
houses, yeah. And then
So I would have been around at this point. I was born in March of 74,
right,
but very young.
you left with Barbara in 74 or early 75. I'm not sure which. I can't remember exactly. And you were in down in LA area somewhere.
And how long was she there before? I mean, I don't really know how it all went.
It was probably it was several months.
But she made her way back to that house at some
It
point.
was several months while I was in the house there. I was working for the fire department. I was communicating with Barbara all along and convinced her that we should reconcile. So I went to California, picked her and you two boys up, brought them back there. We lived there for both 76 to like 77, maybe 78, 77, I think.
Barbara got remarried in 77, so it would have been before.
It was the early part of 77. We split up.
Okay.
She got married shortly after that.
She got remarried at the end of 77, December of
yeah.
77, yeah. So you officially divorced in the early part of 77.
Sometime during the middle of the year. It seemed like it was December we got divorced. It seemed like the date was December.
It must have been December 76 then. She remarried maybe a year later.
Well, it seemed like it was faster than that. I'm not. It's in that area, like there within years.
I do. I'm just trying. She at some point was living in the house on Darling Street with just the two of us, I believe, and you weren't there. Is that correct? Or were you always there when she was there?
Yeah, I think I was always there.
Great. Okay. But after that, she moved in with your parents, though.
Yeah, we totally split up, and she moved in with
Connie and Gordon in the Morgan house.
Right.
Yeah.
And I stayed there.
And I have some very early memories of living there.
Yeah.
And then from there, how long? So you kept the house for a while and then sold the house?
Not too long, less than 2 years. Less than 2 years, maybe close to 18 months.
And then just sold the house.
Then she wanted her share of the money, so we had to sell the house. So that ended that program.
And then so what happens after that? And I really don't even know. I've never asked you or her about this. So where do you go after that? What happens after you?
Well, I kind of bounced around Ogden.
You're working with the fire department, the Ogden Fire Department still, though.
Right, yes. Worked with them. I had friends who were mostly single guys, and we kind of partied a lot around town.
Yeah.
Had several girlfriends. I lived in a small apartment on 28th Street down close to Washington Boulevard. I lived there for a while. And then moved a couple of times after that, just around town here and there. I had a friend at the fire department, and his mom and dad lived next door to a house on 28th Street, actually, up by the high school. While we were there one time visiting his mom and dad, running an errand of some kind, I met a girl that lived next door and started seeing her. And eventually we got married within a few months.
Her name was Jerry. Correct?
Jerry, yes. That was Jerry Gibb. We got married. And I lived in the house on 28th Street because her mother and dad were on a mission in Hawaii. So I lived there for a while. Then that didn't work out well for me. And I left to another little apartment someplace, basement apartment in town. And then
how long were you married to her?
Probably less than 18 months.
And she had one child.
Yeah,
right?
one kid.
One young child.
Yeah, one young
son.
boy. Yeah. And then I was taking an EMT class at Weber State to enhance the fire department job. And there were some bountiful police officers taking the same EMT class and I met a girl in the EMT class whose name was Terry. And we were social and saw each other for a couple of 3 months or so. And then seemed like it was the summer of that year, 78 maybe, early 78. I moved to Woods Cross where she lived and moved in with her. And then we got married. I want to say it was late 78. I was married with her for 5 years.
She had 3 kids, if I recall.
Yes, 3. Uh, in the meantime, I got a job with West Valley City. They incorporated that year and formed their own fire department. I applied and got hired. And I worked there for a year. Then I had an opportunity to go to Seattle and got a job there at the fire department in Seattle. That's where I stayed.
Well, hold on. So how long were you with Terry, would you say?
About 5 years.
From 78 to 80,
No.
Eighty five.
She quit her job at the Davis County Sheriff's Department in Seattle with me for a while.
And her kids went up there with you too?
Yes. Yeah, we came up there. And towards the end of our marriage, we were having a lot of difficulty. And at the same time, I was applying for the Seattle Fire Department, going through the testing process. So I got hired in Seattle in May of '83. So I went to work for them.
Why? How did you even end up in Seattle? I mean, how did that even come to be?
One of the places I lived in Ogden, I had an apartment. I shared the apartment with a friend of mine. It was my neighbor when I lived on 28th Street. He was graduating from Weaver State and he was looking to get out of the house he was living in. We found this apartment and moved into there. And I shared that house with him for about a year or so. Sometimes I don't remember the time exactly. But he graduated, moved to Seattle, and went to work for Boeing. And that's how I got to Seattle. Went to go with him. I wanted to go to Seattle. I wanted to get out of Salt Lake. I was not happy with Terry's situation.
But
really unhappy with it.
But she did move up there with you.
Later on, it took a year, 18 months. And then while I was going through the testing process in Seattle, which took almost a year to get hired. I applied for Seattle in 81 or 2. Didn't get hired till May of '83.
But you lived up there during that entire time while you were testing and going through.
Yes.
So what were you doing for income while you were?
I was working for, you know what Jiffy Lube is?
Yep.
Okay, it was a company called Minute Lube. And they were close to where I lived. I got a job with them and helped changing oil. I, within a few months, became the assistant manager at the Minute Lube and worked there until the fire department hired.
I always thought you were management material. That's good. So you know your lubricants too.
I do.
Um,
I know my viscosities.
so while you're going through the testing process, you're working there and scraping by. Probably it's
Fairly.
Yeah. And then so she moves up there a year or so or more later
Right.
with you, and that is roughly what year did she move up there? Just guessing.
The beginning of 83, somewhere in there.
And then she moves it. Does she work for the police department up there?
No. She got a job with a construction company being a dispatcher of some kind.
And then, so how long does that last, her being up there? or being married, is that where you guys ultimately split up? You were in
Yeah,
Seattle?
I actually left. I left the house that we were living in. I left there in the March or April of '83. Got hired in May of '83. So
I bet you stayed up there.
I did.
Did she stay up there?
Actually, she moved to Bonners Ferry in Idaho.
Okay.
The construction company had a job up there. She moved up there and got married to some guy up there. Haven't seen her since.
Bonner's Ferry's way up north by Canada.
Right, right
Yeah.
up in the
Yeah.
north of Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah. So, but you stay there, you get on with the Seattle Fire Department,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you retired from the Seattle Fire Department.
Yes, I did.
And you worked at several different stations there, which we can get into later. But going back a little bit, um, so you're there, and at some point, you meet Lisa. Not too long after that, I don't think.
No, it wasn't.
And you met her in California, is that correct?
Right. I was in the fire department. I might have had a year in, but I'm not sure I did. Yeah, it's probably 84, 83. Yeah, probably 84. There was one of the workers I worked with was campaigning for a trip to Mexico and wanted me to go to Mazatlan just for a week's vacation because it was, had hot deals going to Mexico. So I went to Mazatlan the week before Christmas, like 5 or 6 or 7 days before Christmas. I went and got back from there. And I had arranged on the flying back, I stopped, and one of the stops was Los Angeles. I arranged to stay at my mom and dad's house
They were living in Los Angeles.
in Temple City.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to spend the Christmas holiday and New Year's Eve there. So I went to their place. Sometime within a couple of days of me getting there, uh, Lisa's kids, Dana and Kelly, were in the ward Christmas party program. So I went to the Christmas party program at the ward. And I was sitting with my mother, my dad, and Lisa, my sister. And Lisa walked in the door. It was coming in just as we were getting ready to say the prayer. So she hurried and sat down, but right in front of me. And we just, hi, I'm Lisa's brother. And she said, okay, I gotta go sit down. On the other side of the room, she was there with some guy, some date. So we were kind of eyeballing each other across the room during the entirety of the Christmas program. And so I forget the days of the week. I mean, Saturday, Sunday, or whatever, I don't remember that. But within a couple of 3 or 4 days of the Christmas program, I called her on a Saturday. Friday evening, I called her and asked her if she wanted to go to breakfast Saturday morning, the next morning. And she agreed, and we were off and running at that point. What's kind of funny is, I guess I could back up a little bit. During the last year, 14, 15, 16 months before I met Lisa, which was Christmas of '84, I was looking for a wife. I wanted to be married. And I'd failed at several relationships with girlfriends in the Seattle area. Sitting down one day saying, what is it I'm doing wrong? What am I missing here? And a couple of the girlfriends that I had were both Catholics and pretty adamant Catholics. and we had talked about each. I was considering marrying one of the two. Not this. I wasn't seeing them at the same time, but during the events, I had conversations with them, and we talked about potentially having kids because neither one of them had children. And the question of religion came up, and they were just adamant they had to be raised Catholic. You know, why? Why not LDS? Goes, well, we could never do that. You know, pretty adamant about it, which was fine. So, but it made me start thinking about, well, the things I'm looking for in a wife with somebody with backgrounds that we could understand each other where we were coming from. Obviously young, fairly good looking. Kids were not a problem. I wanted to have kids. So I started looking around the neighborhood, and I talked to my sister, Lisa, and asked her, who do you know in California that meets these requirements, qualifications, being basically raised LDS, is a fairly decent person, not a drug user. And she said, well, I know somebody. Then she saw and says, no, I'm not going to tell her about you.
Yeah.
So that was that. But this was the girl she was talking about. So I went to breakfast and off we went. And that was, I think, the very first part of the year, around January 1st. Because I spent the Christmas week, 25th through the 1st, at my mom and dad's house, and my girlfriend from Seattle came up to meet me there in LA and spend the Christmas day and the Christmas break day with me. So as soon as she got on the plane and left, I called Lisa on the phone and says, let's do breakfast tomorrow. Sure. Well, I thought you'd never call. Interesting. Kind of interesting deal. So.
Well, it's interesting that you said you were looking for marriage again. I mean, at this point, you've been married 3 times and had other relationships besides that. Were you not just? I'm surprised you weren't a little bit jaded, I guess, toward the whole institution. I guess at this point.
No, not really. No, marriage didn't bother me. One of the bigger mistakes in my life, and I may have told you this in an earlier episode that we had, getting divorced from Barbara and all the things that I did to create the circumstances that generated that divorce were huge mistakes on my part. Yeah. Huge. And I realized that it was all my fault. If I had done it different, I'd still be married to her, and yeah. On and on and on. No, I wanted to be married. But I wanted somebody that wasn't an idiot. That's the wrong word.
I understand.
That wasn't in total conflict with me. And the other people were.
Well, that's the thing too. That's surprising. And not surprising isn't the right word, but so you at this point for the last 8 to 10 years had not been very churchy, right?
That
wasn't.
No.
But you must have still had some of that in it because that's what you were still looking for.
Sure. Yeah. I just want somebody that could relate to me and I could relate to them. And I thought a similar background in growing up, a cultural background that was similar would be easier to adapt to and adjust to.
So you
turn this off for me.
Okay, so you at the Ward Christmas party, and that Christmas break, you link up with Lisa a couple of times, go on a couple breakfast runs, and then where does communicate? So you fly back to Seattle shortly thereafter.
Right. We saw each other 2 or 3 times that week, and then it's time to leave. I was hooked. Flew back to Seattle and started up the long distance communications. I flew back a couple more times during February and March. And I flew back again in April. And asked her to marry me. She said yes.
Wait, what year is this?
84, 80, 85,
85.
85. He got married in April of 85.
Yep. Okay. So, and that's you live in that house in Tequila, right?
While I was going to California to see her, the house was closing. That was the closing period of the house last month. So when we moved back, I had that house ready to move into with her and the family. The house in Tukwila.
She has her two girls, and I think they're 9 and 7, maybe.
They didn't come with us when we moved there because they stayed in California with their dad. Then they came up when school started in September.
Okay, that makes sense because I didn't know them. So I uh, visited you for the first time when I was 11, which would have been 1985 in the summer.
Yeah.
And I think you were just newly married, Lisa, at that point. And I don't think Dana and Kelly were there at that time. And
No,
it was just a quick, like 3 or 4 day trip.
Right. They showed up like August or something like that.
Lisa's working up there. You're working for the Seattle Fire Department, and Dana and Kelly get there. And so you go into family mode at that point, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everything's, and I really like that house, by the way. I know, I still think about it. I thought it was a cool house.
It was a little house.
It doesn't seem like that to me now, but I can see. I mean, it doesn't seem to me at the time that it was, but I can see where it is.
Yeah.
It had the basement apartment. So now you're back in action in family mode. Dana and Kelly are pretty young still, 9 and 7 when you married, and so they've got a lot of raising left to do.
Yes, which was fine with me because they were still young.
And how was that? Was that how was kind of stepping into that?
It
That
worked
role.
fine. Dana was very adamant that I was not her dad. She understood the stepfather role I had.
Which you could understand, right? At
Yeah.
that age in particular.
Sure, Kelly fell right into place as far as being a loving, adoring little daughter.
Yeah.
And Dana was difficult as far as being torn between
Sure.
mother and father kind of a thing. Before too long, Lisa was pretty aware of the fact that I wasn't a very regular attender. I wasn't a regular church attender. She was.
But she knew that going into it, right? I mean,
Yes.
that wasn't a surprise.
Yes, no surprise at all.
But was she? She was.
She was coming back from a long time not going to church. She was into it about a year of being a regular active
Before you met or before?
before.
Okay.
So we kind of agreed that I'd go to church with her on Sundays unless there was something else planned on Sunday, and she would do that with me. Well, it turned out that we always went to church on Sunday, almost always. So while living in that house, I met, we were in I forget what state we were in, Tukwila, but the bishop of our ward was just an amazing individual. And I quite liked him a lot. So we were in the ward for a few months. I was going to church every Sunday, was trying to clean up my act as far as bad habits, which at that point in time was the only bad habit I had was drinking coffee. I just saw no reason to quit. The bishop called me one day, and asked me, I'm getting this mixed up. No, it was tithing settlement. We went to see him at tithing settlement in December. No, that's not true. We went to see him in September of 86, I believe. 86. And he asked me, how did I feel? And Lisa and I were both in the room. And he asked me, how did I feel about going to the temple with Lisa? I said, well, that could be a problem right now. He said, well, when would you like to go? And I just picked off a date and I said, well, what about our anniversary in April, which is the 26th of April? Why don't we shoot for that date?
So you'd been married less than a year still?
Pretty close to a year.
Yeah.
At least they was looking over their mouth open going, we're going to the temple.
Yeah.
You know, kind of a question. And I said, well, I'll have to do some rearranging in my life. And went back. And the tithing settlement came in December. We went there and he asked me, are you a full tithe payer? And I go, no, I am not for this year, but I have been since October when I committed to you to do it. And I've been a full tithe payer ever since. So the year clicked by. I don't know what, it seemed like 86 or 87, we went to the temple in Seattle.
Wait, when was Amy born? That
88.
Yeah.
88. So it might have been 87. We went to the temple in 87, I suppose.
in the Seattle temple.
Yes. Shortly after Amy was born, we decided to sell the house because the market was way up. And we sold the house for $100,000, which is shocking. I paid $60,000 for it.
Wow, yeah.
And we looked for a place to live in. We wound up going to Belfair, Washington, which is the other side of the canal, Hood Canal. We bought that house, which you're familiar with that house.
Yes.
And we paid $94,000 for it, for the house. So we moved in there and we were just that dumb and happy.
And you were there for a good
15 years.
Yeah. But that's quite a commute.
Yes, it was, but I only worked 8 days a month. Remember that. That made it doable.
And you could either commute by ferry or drive around.
Could drive around, take the boat with it.
And at some point during that, you have the opportunity to become an arson investigator, fire marshal type person.
Well, actually,
right?
it happened when we moved to Belfair.
How did that happen? Like, what made you want to
Well,
do
I
that?
applied for the job. There was an opening. I applied for it. I was accepted. And part of that was going to the police academy.
How old are you at this point in age?
We moved there in 1990.
So
Or
40,
92.
41, 42,
Yeah,
43,
right.
early 40s, we'll say that.
Yeah. Amy was a baby, or 2 years old or something like that. So I needed to go to the police academy, which happened to be in Tukwila, of all places, like 6 blocks from where we used to live.
Yeah.
So I arranged to stay at this fire station in Seattle at nights, or on weeknights, to go to the school during the daytime. And that worked out as far as the commuting issue went. So I graduated from there from the academy in 1990.
So this job is a police job. Is it a police job or a fire job?
Well, I worked for the fire department, but we were attached to the police department as the arson investigation unit of the Seattle Police Department.
But you have police authority, I guess you could say.
Carried badges and guns, arrested people, and took him to jail.
And you did that until you retired.
No, not exactly. I did that for was I did it for probably 5 years, maybe 6 years, and had a couple of very traumatic incidents, fires. I was pretty fried brain wise. So I told my boss I needed to take a break. I need to get out. And so I went back to work in the fire engine state at the fire station in South Seattle and worked there for like 4 years. And then went back to the fire investigation unit and then worked there for another 3 years or 4 years. Then retired from that in 2006.
So meantime, all your kids are growing up in Belfair, which seems like a nice. I mean, it's a nice little small town.
It was a great place. It was a great place.
And did you? Why did you move away from there? Totally.
Well, I retired and we wanted to move back to Utah. I wanted to move back to Utah.
Why did you want to move back to Utah?
Well,
closer to family.
Well, the biggest reason was it rained so much. Lisa and I were both pretty on the rain. You know, it rains 9 months a year.
Yeah. When did you? How old? 3 of your kids had already graduated. It was just Austin who hadn't graduated yet, right?
Yes.
Austin finished high school in Utah.
Right? Yes. Yes. Amy started at the Y that year, 2006, the fall of 2006. She went to the Y. So she was there. Austin, of course, was with us. Lisa's mom and dad couldn't take care of themselves. They needed to live with us. We needed a bigger house than we had. And then Dana and Corey had the opportunity to move to Utah, and he could transfer his work to Bed Bath and Beyond in Utah, which he did. So we had 3 of our kids with us, and Lisa's mom and dad in Eagle Mountain, Utah. We all lived there, not in the same house, but me and Lisa, Austin, and Lisa's mom and dad.
Really close proximity.
Sure. And Dana and Corey just lived, less than a mile.
Well, I guess before we jump to Eagle Mountain, we covered a 15-year period really quickly there. What else do you say about the time you were in Belfair and the kids? I mean, you had Amy, then you eventually had Austin. They essentially grow up there. Was it a pretty good time, a happy time?
Well, yeah, I would say very happy for me and Lisa. And the kids were just kids. I mean, Amy and Kelly were just a pleasure to be around. Dana was in her teenage years in high school, and she was a little high schoolish. Austin was just having a heck of a good time. He made friends. That's where I really got entrenched in church, was in Washington, Belfair.
I think you served at Bishopric there too, right? Or
Yeah.
branch presidency?
No,
I'm not sure.
Bishopric. Then I went from the Bishopric out into the High Council for the tour of duty. I was in the stake young men's program, the counselor, and then the stake young men's president. And after that, back on the High Council again. So I was entrenched. I was a believer. Still paying a full tithing.
Yeah. Well, and so those were good years.
Yeah. That's where Austin started to get in trouble. Friends in the neighborhood. They were a lot of marijuana going on.
But at some point and that's shortly after, at that point, that's when you moved back to Utah.
Well, when I retired in 06. And we decided to go back to Utah. Number one, to get out of Washington because of the rain and the terrible influences that were going on to Austin. Uh, and we had people that were going there, Dana and Corey and their kids.
There was an exodus to Utah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you end up in Eagle Mountain, and you're there for 5 to 10 years, right? 5 at least.
I think it was 7.
Okay.
I think it was 7 years we lived there. That's where Lisa. I tried to tell Lisa there were the difference between Utah Mormons and non-Utah Mormons. She just didn't believe it until we got there and discovered that there was such a difference.
Yeah.
So it was all a good experience as far as church goes. Nothing outrageous or untoward. It would work out just fine. Dana and Corey, meanwhile, got transferred. Corey did, his job, to the Bed Bath and Beyond in Logan.
Yep.
They moved up here, and then we were coming up here to visit them on a very frequent basis. And I just fell in love with River Heights. So we started looking for houses here, and we came across this one.
And so Amy had also married and settled in Washington.
Right. Yes.
And in the, I think it was Gig Harbor initially, right? Is that correct?
In that area, yeah.
And then Austin stayed down. Where did Austin stay down in like the Eagle Mountain area when you moved here? Or did he come up here?
Well, he graduated from high school, had a job there, had a place he was living there. He wasn't going to move here. All his friends were there, all his connections. And so we moved here in, I can't tell you the month. I can't tell you. It was, yes, I can. It was September of 2012 when we moved here. So I lived in Eagle Mountain 6 years, 6.5 years. We moved here in September of 2012. I had planned and had paid for our month's vacation in the Yucatan Peninsula. I'd already paid that, had the beach house leased and everything. So we went for the month of October to Mexico. As soon as we moved here, went there. Austin and Nathan and Amy came down there. Austin got kind of sick and had to go home. Unbeknownst to me at the time, it was drug withdrawal, sickness. Came back here and started working on the house. We had to replace the floors and a bunch of things like that to make it the way Lisa wanted it. So that was in the fall of 2012. And I think in the early spring, late spring of 2013, Austin showed up on the front door. Said, I got a problem. I'm sick. I'm addicted to heroin and I can't shake it by myself. I need help. So we moved him into the basement, went to Pleasant Grove, I think is where his place was. Picked up all his stuff and brought it back here. They went through a year of withdrawal and counseling and drug rehab stuff.
And it worked out pretty well. I mean,
yeah.
And how long after that did he meet Rachel?
Well, he was here for several months. One afternoon, early evening, two individuals showed up on the front step. One was Rachel and one was some guy. And they said, we're Rachel and whatever his name was. Relief Society president and the Elders Quorum president, we kind of like to see Austin. Said, well, he's not here. And we talked for a few minutes. They were here to invite him to come to church at the YSA ward down the street. I said, well, you're welcome to come back here with your Elders Quorum presidency, but that isn't going to do a lot of good unless you come back with lots of girls. And probably 2 weeks later, they showed up, the Relief Society presidency. Rachel was the Relief Society president. And that's where she met Austin, or he met her. And then they sort of started going out, doing stuff. And then not several months later, they, oh no, it was Thanksgiving time. We proposed to her. They got married a few months later in the winter time.
So here you are now, it's 2024, almost 2025. And so you've been here for 12, almost 13 years here in this house.
Yeah.
And that almost takes us up to present. What have we missed? What have we got? Have we skipped over?
We missed the fire department stories.
Yeah, I'd be pleased to hear some of that.
That's another topic. Yeah, there's a lot of stories, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of adventure.
Yeah,
lots of adventure.
Well, what, like, as you reflect back, I mean, so you're 76 now?
Yeah.
You're 76. And I mean, as anybody's life does, you've had your ups and downs, right?
Sure.
For sure. But yet things kind of, you say you have some regrets, but also things kind of turn out. Can you speak to that?
Well, generally my life's been going uphill in a good way. Sure, not going downhill.
Yeah.
I don't know how to address that, but to say that I've been blessed in every aspect of everything on this.
So, I mean, how do you, I mean, you talked about, yes. So you have, I'm just philosophically, you have this big regret. And on the other hand, look how great things have turned out. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? I guess, right? I mean,
I guess not.
Because look how good things can be.
Well, right. That's the big regret, of course, was getting divorced from your mother.
But had you not,
but had you not, things would have been 100% different, all different.
And I guess that doesn't mean you don't still regret that, right? But at the same time,
well, I've learned valuable lessons from that experience.
Like what?
Like how to stay married.
Like what? How would you tell your posterity how to stay married? What lessons do you learn from that?
Morality.
Okay, it's got to be more than just that, though, right?
Well, it's being involved in your wife's or your spouse's life, being there to support, not belittling. Now, I can say, without exception, that I can think of anyway, I have never called Lisa a name, like you're dumb or you're stupid, or you got a big butt or anything like that. Anything like that. Never called her a name. And I think that's important, not to degrade somebody that's your spouse. Is to say, it doesn't mean I haven't been angry. It doesn't mean that I haven't talked harshly, but I never resorted to name calling.
Well, how do you overcome your? I mean, so you grew up with some significant dysfunction in your own parents' marriage, and some of that surely, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I think you learned how to be a spouse by watching your parents.
But doing the things not doing the things they did, but doing it different.
Did you? How did that affect you, and how did you overcome that? I guess you could say, or did it take a while? Did it take some iterations?
It's really a hard question. I think I watched my mother and my father interact and saw the things that uh, pushed the buttons that got the trouble going. I just never pushed those buttons. And Lisa, on the other hand, has never pushed those buttons either. No, I don't know. She didn't come from a super happy marriage family. So she's acts a lot differently than her mother would have in under certain circumstances.
Um, well, what what else? So looking back in a retrospective perspective, what other life lessons can you share, pass on, assuming that you have posterity that's going to hear you now and in the future when you're not even around? What would you tell them?
A long time ago, I mean, years and years and years ago, when I was sort of running kind of crazy and wild, I thought, I don't need to go to church because I can make up my own. I can dictate to myself what my own mode of behavior ought to be. Uh, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. I can formulate my own rules and my own commandments, if you will. And that never ever worked out. I needed the influence of an outside guideline for me to live by, one that was solid and rigid and didn't change. So I would say find yourself some standard to live by, a good one. You can only assess that yourself, and then live by it and do it. And don't make exceptions for you have misbehaviors, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, live by what you said you're going to live by.